So this morning we are back in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, starting in, I think it's verse 13. Yeah, that's about where we left off. So today we're going to work through the rest of chapter 9, all of chapter 10, and chapter 11 through verse 6. Next couple Sundays will probably be Christmas focused, but then we'll finish up Ecclesiastes in that last Sunday of the year. So let's go ahead and jump in. Again, Ecclesiastes chapter 9, starting in verse 13. He says, I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembered the poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. So let's think about what Solomon's been talking about, and then that'll help us figure out what to do with this section. He's been talking about wisdom, well, all through the book. He's been talking about it from a couple of different angles. Right? He's been talking about the benefits of wisdom. If you remember chapter 7, verse 9, he says, wisdom makes one wise person more powerful than 10 rulers in a city. He mentioned some other good things about wisdom in Ecclesiastes, and we can't forget he also wrote the book of Proverbs, and there is a lot of wisdom information in there. And he said in Proverbs 21:22, one who is wise can go up against the city of the mighty and pull down the stronghold in which they trust. So Solomon talks a lot about the benefits of wisdom, but as you know from our journey so far through Ecclesiastes, he's been talking even more about the meaningless of wisdom. Yes, wisdom can benefit you as you navigate your day-to-day life. Yes, your life is easier and less troublesome if you have wisdom, but at the end of the day, we are all dead. We're all going to the same place. So ultimately, this too is meaningless. So that was the background. Then let's jump to verse 11 that we covered last week. Read that again here. I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise or wealth to the brilliant or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. So that was last week. He was introducing or reinforcing this idea he talked about before about how we don't always get what we deserve. Other people don't always get what they deserve. And so he's talking about this again here in the part that we started with today, verses 13 through 16. And he gives us this example in these verses about wisdom not being rewarded, which is not what you would expect. So the story he told, he's talking about this city, and maybe it wasn't a very powerful city. Maybe it was, but regardless, a king with an opposing army shows up that's much more powerful than the forces of the city. And so the expectation would be you have this very powerful force that would destroy or take out the city. But there was this poor man in the city who happened to be wise, and it doesn't explain how he did it, but through some of his wisdom, he was able to put a plan into place that saved the town, and it saved everybody. So here we see this example of wisdom prevailing, but Solomon says, the wisdom of the poor man went unrewarded. When it says here he wasn't remembered, that's what it means. He wasn't rewarded for what he had done. And Solomon said that this story had made a powerful impression on him. And so he's concluded wisdom is better than strength. Wisdom is more powerful than strength. But even that isn't the answer to finding something eternal in this machine of nature that just keeps grinding away day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. So wisdom has value, yes, but there's a problem because your wisdom will be forgotten eventually. And there's another problem here as well. This is verses 17 through chapter 10, verse 1. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. So previously, he says, wisdom displayed doesn't always get the attention that it deserves. And now he's saying the value of wisdom, that wisdom applied, that can be compromised by even a little bit of sin. This is very important for us to recognize here. Most of us know, most of us understand, all of us should keep in mind, you can ruin years of testimony in a moment. Right? You can build and cultivate a strong, powerful testimony for others, and you can blow all that away with one mistake, one careless comment. You can compromise everything that you have worked for in the eyes of others. Ask me how I know. Verse 2, the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. I'm tempted to just move on here. What this feels like is validation for the feelings that most of us in this room get when we watch the evening news. But I assure you, it's not that. All right? Solomon is not saying here what it almost seems like he's saying. I did some research on this, and apparently the terms right and left with regards to political affiliation didn't become a thing until about 1789 in the French Assembly. So here's a fun fact on the history of that. When the Estates General, later transformed into the National Assembly, met in Versailles in May through June of 1789, things kind of changed versus how they'd arranged themselves before. During that period of time, the deputies began sitting according to their political views rather than by their estate or region as they had grouped themselves before. And so, this is in France, right? And so supporters of the revolution, radical change, the Third Estate, and supporters of limiting the king's power, they sat on the left-hand side of the assembly, with respect to the president's chair, and then supporters of the monarchy, the church, tradition, and the ancient regime sat on the right side. So you had monarchists and conservatives sitting on the right side, and you had revolutionaries literally sitting on the left side of the president. And so newspapers in France started using the terms right and left, literally where the people were seated, to refer to that political leaning. That started happening in 1789. By the mid to late 19th century, this was the standard for how you discussed political affiliation all over Europe. Left and right becomes universal shorthand for one's leanings. You were a conservative or a progressive, right or left. And by the early 20th century, that became a global thing, including here in the United States. So if you think about our timeline, Solomon is writing this 3,000 years ago. Nobody associated this terminology with politics until about 300 years ago. So Solomon is not giving us what we may think we're seeing here. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. So here's what he is saying. When I'm reading from the NIV and it says his heart inclines to the right, that literally in the Hebrew is at his right hand. And being at someone's right hand in that culture was a sign of protection. It was a place of honor. Psalm 16:8, I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Psalm 110, verse 5, the Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. Psalm 121, verse 5, the Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. And so what the Bible is telling us here with regards to this image here, a wise person has the Lord at his right hand. That's the place of protection and honor. And so the wise person, because he has the Lord at his right hand and he's wise, he will naturally incline that way. But a fool A fool, although the Lord might be at hand, the fool inclines in the other direction. He turns the opposite way of God. He looks somewhere else for counsel and for reason. That's verse 2 of chapter 10. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. Here's verse 3. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. This isn't meant to be literal, although I suppose sometimes it can work that way. Somebody, I guess, could walk down the street in a manner that you look at them and say, good grief. But you guys know this. Common in our culture, we talk about someone's walk as a metaphor for moral behavior. Right? We talk a lot about, this is my walk with God. That's how good am I doing in relation to living this book? Even outside of Christianity, our culture talks like this. They say, do you walk the talk? Right? Are you living the way that you say someone should be living? We talk this way today. This was a common way to talk in the Bible. 1 Samuel 8, verses 1 through 3. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not, and here it is, follow his ways. His sons, literally, in the Hebrew, did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So verse 3, again, even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. It's just what Jesus said, you will know them by their fruit. Right? Fools walk, you can observe it, you can see what they're all about. Verse 4, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. This is very simple. Solomon had talked about before how wisdom can protect you. And here it is coming up again. If you are working for the king and you mess up, and it's actually you sinned, you did something bad here that would arouse the king's ire against you, you don't have to leave your post. You can apply wisdom to the situation and diffuse it and move on with your life. Verses 5 through 7, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Excuse me. So we've got a contrast to verse 4 here. Verse 4 was all about how wisdom applied can help you keep your job even when you've made the king angry. And now he's explaining that all jobs aren't necessarily handed out on the basis of merit. So Solomon is saying that he's seen a great evil resulting from the mistakes of rulers, and that is them appointing fools to positions of authority that they were never qualified to hold in the first place. And he says, he's seen that, fools occupying positions of authority, while the rich occupy the low ones. And in this case, by rich, when he says that, he means wise. There was a feeling in that culture, they didn't have the class warfare that we do here. In that culture, there was this feeling that if you manage to become rich in your life, you must be a wise person, because a fool never would have been able to do that. So Solomon is tapping into that. Proverbs 14:24 says, the wealth of the wise is their crown, but the folly of fools yields folly. And Solomon says he's seen slaves riding horses and princes walking on foot. And this is more than just a logistical issue. Back at that culture in that time, riding a horse, while expensive, was also a position of honor. While walking wherever it is you had to go beyond a certain distance, that was considered a humiliation because you weren't on a horse. And so Solomon is saying here that he's seen slaves living like princes and princes living like slaves. And he says this is the kind of chaos that results from leaders assigning people to roles that they aren't qualified to do. Verses 8 and 9. Always be clothed in white. Wrong place. 8 and 9. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Now, this passage has been strangely controversial over the years, but I think it's pretty clear. Solomon is just saying here that whatever advantage or profit you can gain from wisdom, that can be nullified if you don't actually apply the wisdom or if you apply it too late. That's what he's saying here, and that's what he's saying in the next several verses, and I think it becomes pretty clear. He starts out introducing the idea. He says, if you dig a pit, you need to be careful not to fall into it. Makes sense, right? You got to apply some wisdom to what you're doing to be able to stay safe. And of course, anybody who has broken through walls knows absolutely to watch out for snakes on the other side. That's just common sense. And verse 9 is more of the same. He's saying you have to be careful and you need to apply wisdom or you can get into trouble. I'll read that again. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Verses 10 through 11. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. So, we've got more on the need to apply wisdom, and here he's introducing the idea of not to do it too late. Verse 10, if you have an axe that's dull, it's still going to get the job done, but you're going to have to work a lot harder to make that happen. So he's saying instead apply some wisdom to the situation and make sure your axe is sharpened before you start chopping down the tree. Pretty straightforward. Verse 11, another no-brainer, because we all know how snake charming works. If you get bitten, you don't get paid. But actually verse 11 is really building on verse 10. Verse 10, you need to apply wisdom if you want to have a good outcome. Sharpen your axe before you go about chopping wood. And verse 11 talks about how the timing of that wisdom, the timing of the application of that wisdom is very, very important. If you're a snake charmer and you have the wisdom of how to handle snakes safely, that wisdom doesn't do you any good if you don't apply it before you reach out and grab the snake. Right? You need the wisdom to be safe in what you do. You need to also apply it at the right time. So, verses 8 through 11, pretty simple. They make sense. Verses 8 and 9, life is dangerous without wisdom. There are plenty of ways that you can hurt yourself if you're not paying attention. Verse 10, wisdom can save you a lot of time and effort from having to brute force everything around you. And verse 11, even though that wisdom can protect you and can make your life easier, it doesn't do you any good if you're not bringing it to bear at the right time. Yeah? So yes, Solomon was correct in literally all the things he was saying, but this is the bigger picture that I think he is trying to explain here. Verses 12 through 15. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning their words are folly, at the end they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toils of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. So verse 12, Solomon starts out this section here with a contrast. He's contrasting the words of the mouth of the wise against the words of the mouth from fools. And the words of the wise, he say, are gracious, but the words of a fool are self-destructive. And in verse 13, he talks about how at the beginning, the words of the fool are folly, and at the end, they are wicked madness. Midweek, we're going to talk more about what he's doing with all that. But he's saying the totality of the words of a fool is folly and wicked madness. And he says fools even multiply these words. And then right after that, in the second half of verse 14, he says what he said last week, we have no idea what is coming. We don't know the future, right? We don't know what the future holds, not all of it anyway. And so we have the picture of this fool who's really just yapping away about, well, anything really. And because he's a fool, he doesn't realize that no one knows the future. And some of us understand that God has explained this to us. And so the folly that comes out of his mouth just goes on and on. He keeps saying, yeah, we need to do this now because that other thing is going to happen in the future. Or this is what the world is going to be like in 50 years if we don't do this thing right now. Blah, blah, blah. Nobody knows what's coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? And Solomon says all the folly that's coming out of the fool wears him out. And he says they don't even know the way to town. That's not meant to be literal. That's just a Hebraic expression that was common at the time. That's roughly equivalent to our saying, he doesn't know enough to come in out of the rain. And that's obvious to the people around them, but they keep acting like a fool anyway. Verses 16 through 17, woe to the land whose king was a servant, and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth, and whose princes eat at a proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. So we've got a contrast here. Verse 16, we see a kingdom with incompetence and undisciplined leadership versus what we see in verse 17, a kingdom with competent and disciplined leaders. We've got a little bit of a translation issue here. I'm reading to you from the NIV, and it said, talking about the king was a servant, the verse 16 king. It really is better translated as this king, this undisciplined king, was a young man. So verse 16 is really saying the king was a child, and a child would lack wisdom. So this was a king without wisdom, doesn't have the experience to be a wise man. And so his officials are throwing a giant party. It's not a problem to eat breakfast. He's giving this picture of these guys having a feast, a drunken feast, first thing in the morning. What do you think they're doing all day for the rest of the day after that? This is the first kingdom. But in the verse 17, we got the contrast, the more positive situation. He says, the king is of noble birth. And here, the birthright isn't the important thing. Doesn't really matter who his father is. It's the idea that because of his birthright, because he was of noble birth, guess what he would have spent every single day doing growing up? Being trained to be king. People took that stuff seriously. So if you were born the heir to the throne, everybody understood one day the weight of the kingdom and its success is going to weigh on your shoulders. And so everybody would be pouring themselves into this young man, trying to help him to get ready. There is benefit from that because when he grows up, Lord willing, he would become a wise man. So here's this king of noble birth, and it says his officials aren't just descending into debauchery first thing in the morning. They're eating, but they're eating for strength. They're doing the right thing. And so we've got this contrast to these two kingdoms, and Solomon is connecting up the consequences of the nation based on these two scenarios, where it's obviously good for the nation to have competent and disciplined leadership, and it's a problem if they don't, and we see it here in verses 18 through 19. Through laziness the rafters sag, because of idle hands the house leaks. A feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. So verse 18, here's the effects of our verse 16 scenario, undisciplined and incompetent leadership. The king and his officials are lazy and ineffective. They're busy throwing a party rather than taking care of business. And so the palace starts to fall into a disrepair. The rafters start sagging. The roof begins to leak. And nobody is doing anything about it. And their perspective is captured perfectly in verse 19. I'll read that again. A feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry. And money is the answer for everything. So everything for these guys is a party. Right? They're just enjoying wine, laughing it up, and having a good time. And they figure you can solve every single problem you got by just throwing money at it. And that works for a little while, but that's ultimately unsustainable because it only works until the money runs out. And since these guys are lazy and doing nothing but partying, the money will run out eventually, and nothing good will follow. And then we have this warning in verse 20, do not revile the king even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words. A bird on the wing may report what you say. So here, Solomon is saying, you may have ineffective and undisciplined leadership, but it's not a good idea to vent about that or obsess on it, because if that gets back to the king or his officials, you might be in for a world of hurt. And we can see how this would happen, because many, many people love to gossip, and gossip is a sin that always destroys, but people do it anyway because they don't care. And so this leads us to chapter 11. And here in verses 1 through 6, Solomon is going to wrap up the larger discussion on people's ignorance of the future that's been going on since the beginning of chapter 9, verse 1. And he's going to give us this very practical advice here. It's true that you don't know what the future holds. None of us do. However, the proper reaction to not knowing what the future holds is not doing nothing. Thought about it, inflection's important here, because it's like, okay, I don't know what the future is, so you don't know what's going to happen in the future, so don't do nothing. I mean, that sounds like we're saying don't do anything, but it really should be don't do nothing, right? We don't know what the future is going to hold, so don't kick back and let that paralyze you, right? We need to act regardless of the fact that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and Solomon has spent several Sunday mornings teaching us that we can't. We just need to act wisely. Here's verses 1 and 2. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So here's the first of the very practical advice about what to do in the face of uncertainty. Don't do nothing, right? Instead, Solomon's saying, hedge your bets. You don't know what disasters are going to come upon the land. You don't know what the markets are going to do. So invest, right? Diversify your investments is what he's talking about here. Don't put all of your eggs into one basket. Don't invest in just one venture. Solomon says invest in 8. Don't just rely on the local grain market. Ship some to other markets as well. And this is, of course, very sound, very practical advice. Every one of us should be saving for a rainy day and also saving for the time when we can't work anymore. We don't know what the future will hold. We don't know what the markets are going to be like tomorrow or 10 years from now or 20 years from now. So don't put all of your money into one stock, right? Invest in mutual funds. Better yet, put your money in a bunch of mutual funds, some in real estate, and so on and so forth. The point is, don't sit back and say, well, it looks like the economy isn't going anywhere good, so I'm not going to do anything at all. Solomon says we should instead say, well, it looks like the economy isn't doing anything good, so I should diversify where I'm saving my money. I think this is pretty straightforward. Verses 3 and 4, if the clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. So now Solomon switches up his example to maybe something close to home here. He's talking about planting and harvesting. And this is something that, admittedly, I know very little about. And there's a number of you here who do this professionally. But please indulge me here. I think I at least understand the point of where he's going with, if I mess up my example, to explain that. Forgive me, please. So, Solomon's talking about the dangers of always waiting for the perfect time to act. We don't know what the future holds. He's been telling us this again and again, right? We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So it's not wise then, because we don't know the future, it's not wise to always wait until the perfect time to act. You can't time the market. You can't. Sometimes delays on doing things, financially doing things, logistically, sometimes delays are warranted. Sometimes waiting is a wise thing to do. But here Solomon's not talking about those times. He's saying generally, you don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. So if you're going to wait until there's absolutely no wind at all to plant your seeds, so the wind doesn't blow them away, or if you hold off on harvesting until you are absolutely certain it's not going to rain, then chances are you're never going to get around to putting anything into the ground, and you're certainly not going to get around to harvesting that way either. And again, he's not talking about extreme examples. Right? If it looks like there's about to be a hurricane passing over your house, then yes, be wise and hold off on doing some of these activities. He's not addressing those kinds of times. What he's addressing here is our very real human tendency that many of us have to kind of freeze up in the face of uncertainty. Because I don't know what tomorrow will bring, I can't plan out exactly what I should do today and the day after that. So many people just wind up doing nothing in the face of that, and that's a problem. Instead, Solomon says, verses 5 and 6, as you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. So Solomon says here, you don't know the future. And by the way, you can't know the future because we're incapable of fathoming God's plans from beginning to end. We're not able to do that. And so Solomon says, with this in mind, go ahead and do the work and be wise about how you do the work. Be wise and plan and offset some of that uncertainty about the future. Plant seeds in the morning, and then in the evening, go out and plant some more, he says, because you have no guarantee that the seeds that you planted in the morning are going to germinate. Right? So because of that, go ahead and hedge your bets, plant some more seeds, and the chances are much better with the extra planting you've done that at the end of the season, something will have actually grown. But by contrast, if you sit back on your hands and you say, woe is me, I can't figure out what the future will hold, you sit back and you do nothing as a result. All you lock in for yourself under the sun is a loss. Solomon says this is an evil that should not be. We're going to go ahead and put a pin in it here. Like I said, Lord willing, the next couple of weeks we're going to meet together, talk about the birth of Jesus. Best story that's ever been told, at least the beginning of it. And then, Lord willing, after that, we'll come back together, we'll finish up this book of Ecclesiastes, and we will never, ever talk about it again. Would you bow with me in prayer? Dear Heavenly God, we thank you so much for letting us be here this morning. We thank you very much for the opportunity to study your word. And God, these lessons that Solomon has been providing us with, I just pray, Lord, that you would write those lessons on all of our hearts. Help us to be able to see things through your eyes and understand how it is that we can glorify you more with our lives and what we are doing. Thank you very much for loving us enough to present us with these challenging and difficult messages. Thank you for what Solomon has been teaching us through this study. Thank you again for giving us this church and our church family. We ask that you would please have your hand of blessing upon the board meeting later today and the Christmas auction tonight, that we would be able to raise a good amount of money for the missionaries that we pray would go towards helping others to come to a saving knowledge of you, Lord. We just ask your hand of blessing would be upon that very complex, lengthy chain of your work being done, and we thank you for letting us be a part of it. We love you dearly, God. We pray these things in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen.